For me, I try to operate on about a second per 10 meters is a good kind of place to be, you know. I think you need a good solid minute, minute and a half after even a short 20-meter sprint, you know, to recover. Now, full recovery, if you want, you know, complete ATP replenishment, you're looking at about 4 to 5 minutes. I think at times in a perfect world, if you have an elite pro athlete, you can maybe do that. But with kids and groups and teams, it's hard to, justify a full recovery like that. So I think minimum would be about, 1 second per 10, I'm sorry, a minute to minute and a half, after about a 20, 30-meter run.
And I would bet that you
Tony,
probably don't have like a stopwatch
no.
counting that. I think coaches kind of know it. Like we know recovery when we see it, or we know that a guy is not ready to do that next rep when we see it. So sometimes I just say the recovery needs to be enough.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, one of the hardest things that we do as coaches in the high performance realm is to try to gauge neural fatigue, right? It's pretty easy to see when somebody's gassed because they're out of air or they, muscular fatigue in the weight room. But neural fatigue's a whole nother monster, right? You can't see or touch or feel that, So it's really, we have to go on the science of how long we think that's going to take to recover and know that if we go beyond, I mean, we'll run fly 10s. Tony, I'm sure you see this. I mean, have you ever had a kid on his fourth rep of a fly 10 run faster than they did in the first two reps? I think it's pretty rare because their nervous system, they might look good, they might start to feel a little bit better, muscular, wise if they didn't warm up well enough, but neurally they're fatigued and they're tired and they can't have that same high output or turnover. So we say that a lot where their fourth, fifth reps are starting to decline, and that's about the time we pull the plug.
Yeah, usually I have like one freak out of my team that doesn't run as fast as till the fifth one. And we always, I mean, the kid always gets probably a little bit tired of me talking about this, but I always say, what does that tell you about your warm up before your race? Like you don't want your race to be a part of your warm up. So
Right.
you, more than anybody, needs more sprinting before you sprint.
Sure. And right, everybody's a little bit different, right? There's no cookie cutter pattern for every kid. And, there's outliers, right? There's kids that just, you have I remember I had a kid in the 800 meters show up for a race about 3 minutes before they walked to the starting line. He was late from a swim meet and he showed up and stepped on the track and won a conference championship in the 800 meters without a warm up at all. And it took every speech that I'd given on proper warm up and just flushed it down the toilet, to all the other kids. But he was an outlier, he was kind of a freak, and you find that all the time. So we try to operate on the norm of what most kids, most athletes are going to experience.
Sweet. Awesome. All right. The next question here is from Mel. First off, she said, thanks for the collaboration. But then she's asked if you guys are doing contrast training most days, and if not, how you would split the sessions in a week.
Tony, you want to go or you want me to take that?
Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, we probably have a sprinkle of it in most sessions, especially in the early training phases. So, we kind of split our days up into three, components of acceleration, max velocity, and change of direction. And typically we are finding ways to contrast within all of those systems. Now, it's not a lot. It might be as simple as a change of direction day. We might do like call it a lateral banded, fast feet, back and forth fast feet, and then unload and do the same thing. We're just kind of potentiating the system for what the high output might be for the day. And so I do think we found ways to try to implement some level of contrast training. And in the weight room, I'd say we contrast every time we're in the weight room at some level in some block of the weight room.
Yeah, we'd be the same way. In our speed drills, we like for our 10th and final speed drill to be an acceleration, and we'll just have bands out, or we'll do partner resisted stuff, and we'll do one of those, and then we'll do an unresisted sprint. So I guess in that way, on speed days we could do it. And I was just thinking in my head that a lot of my guys lift during the day, and it's not exactly contrast training where you go from a lift to a jump or from a resisted to a total sprint. But in a way, like I always say, the worst thing you could ever do is to lift and never sprint. It's just, you're just not getting the rest of the package if you're doing that. And sadly, so many football teams, as you know, they lift only, and then they just go out and do a lot of conditioning and a lot of football stuff. And so they're never getting that full recruitment of muscle fibers, that on and off frequency that's so important. And yeah, so in a way, we're kind of contrasting anytime we have a focus on strength and sprint.
Sure. Yep. I just think it's a way to be really efficient with your time and, efficient with your outputs. And again, you can kind of check the box on strength work and speed work in a same session, which is gold, because we never get enough time with the athletes.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Tony, I think the next two, I would like to start with you. I think they'll be good ones for you. The next question was, what is the best drills for acceleration training for kids with only turf and a few cones? How can you get load? Tony, this just felt like it was a question made for you, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when I post stuff like partner resisted stuff where you just put your hands on a guy's shoulders and they come out and you give way and then let them go, or we have the thick bands and people are like, hey, coach, there's sleds for that kind of thing, and I'm like, yeah, there is, but I'm also coaching 35 kids and sleds are not very efficient with that many kids. So yeah, anything that can add resistance without taking a lot of time. Now, if I was working with one or two athletes, like I know Chris Corfus does a lot, I know Brian does a lot at his facility, a lot of those things would be different.
Yeah, I think I think about like isometrics, like an isometric push into a wall or some kind of single leg isometric hold into sprinting or into, I mean, there's ways to load the system without having to have fancy equipment or, you could just do it on a field, honestly.
Explain that idea of isometric to a sprint.
Yeah, so I mean, you could load like into if you're in your gym at your indoor track, you could go to the wall and load up into an A position on the wall and hold that almost like a car push. I call it a car push ISO. So you're loading in, you got the foot dorsiflex, negative shin angle, and you're pushing hard, right? Almost to the point of, you're shaking. There's some fast twitch muscle recruitment in an isometric hold, and you could hold that for 15 to 20 seconds and then get a short recovery of 30 seconds and then do an acceleration. So you've just now done some level of contrast training without having to have a band or a partner or a 1080 or, any of those things. And again, going back to the late 90s, we were doing some of those creative things and getting similar results. So to whoever asked that question, creativity is your only limiting factor.
Love it. Okay, cool. And Tony, the next one feels right up your alley as well. And Brian, of course, feel free to jump in on these. I just know, like, I'm reading this question, I'm like, that's made for Tony. Gabby asked, can you say something about how speed training has a generally beneficial impact on total CNS? In other words, how, for example, sprint training for athletes might benefit a swimmer or a wrestler?
The best part of my presentations when I'm talking about the CNS and how speed's the tide that lifts all boats, and that speed is global. I remember Les Bellman saying that, and I like those terms. Speed is global. So in other words, as you get faster in a straight line, you get a lot better doing everything else. But I totally have stolen Brian's work with his swimmers and with his golfers. And like I could imagine both of those groups saying, but Coach Kula, we don't lift heavy things in our sport. We don't sprint in our sport. We don't jump in our sport. We don't bounce in our sport. But yet that's exactly how he's training these people. And as you become a better athlete, you become a better golfer or swimmer or lacrosse player. So I'll let Brian talk about his stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think just like Lisa, less talking about it being global. I talk about just like speed can be systemic, right? It can impact the entire system. And so, when we have data collection on swimmers who, when they run, they don't look very good when they run. I promise you that. But the intent of what they're doing and, the coordinative abilities that go into sprinting, there is no activity that you can do that has a higher CNS stimulation than sprinting. And so you see a systemic, improvement. And the swim group that we worked with had 48 club records set after the first year of training with us. And the guy was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, well, we're doing the same stuff we do with everybody else. And we kind of stumbled into that and found that, golfers were hitting the ball farther and swimmers were swimming faster and, all that stuff. We're in the midst of a tennis, deal down here in Nashville right now where we're working with the tennis players and trying to show that, through some speed work, we can improve rotational power and acceleration, deceleration work because it's going to impact the CNS.
Yeah, Bush Exnader, about 8 years ago, I listened to a podcast and he had been working with a volleyball team. And there is no sprinting in volleyball. But they asked him, what's the first thing you start working on with that volleyball team? And he said, sprinting. That's what you do. And I think it's so important to recognize that. And then getting back to these football teams that don't sprint. Like in a sport where sprinting really is a part of the sport, and literally they run slow all the time because they're tired all the time. They lift all the time and the steak is burned every day. And so they never recover. It's an endless spiral downward. But if you have better players than the other team, you're probably still going to win.
That's amen. Jimmy's and Joe's.
Yep.